Welcome to the Landmark Theater's Q&A podcast. In this podcast, you will hear a discussion with director Mick Jackson from the film Denial, moderated by Landmark Theater's president and CEO, Ted Mundorff, recorded at the Landmark in West Los Angeles.
So this cast and production team is as stellar as it gets.
Yeah, and all British.
Huh?
And all British.
All British.
Even Rachel.
Okay. How were you able to put this A-team together, which includes actors Rachel Weisz, Tom Wilkinson, the amazing Timothy Spall, along with writer David Hare, producers Gary Foster, and Russ Krasnoff? How did you get on board, and how did you get them all to come together?
The story. Why do you do any film? Why does any actor decide to do any part? Because of the subject and because of who's in the story. This was a great story 7 years ago, 8 years ago, when it first came to the attention of the producers, when they happened to stumble upon it. Even though it was widely covered in the press, it wasn't widely known in the States. And they started to try and get a script together without success. And about 6 years ago, they went to the BBC and participant media, and they said, can we get a writer of stature on this? And they said, well, we have a really good relationship with David Hare. You know David Hare is the scriptwriter, that's the wrong word, the dramatist, the scenarist of The Hours, The Reader, one of the leading kind of playwrights and screenwriters of our time, and he said, I'll do it. And when he did it, I worked with him for the last 5 years on this, shaping this thing. There was a script, and everybody wanted to do it. All the actors wanted to do it. Tim Spall was the last person to commit because we tried everybody else. Nobody wanted to play David Irving. Everybody wanted to play all the other. Everybody said, well, I won't work again if I play this part. You know, it's such an evil man. Ask someone else. Timothy Spall didn't say that. Timothy Spall is an amazingly courageous actor. He has played the last hangman of England, Albert Pierpoint. He's played Ian Paisley, and he was willing to play David Irving. And I said, well, how do you do that? How do you avoid making the man sympathetic, making him human? And he said, he is human. That's the scary thing about him. He's not a monster from outer space. He's capable of doing all this whatever his handiwork is, as we all are. And he said, I did a very interesting experiment for myself. I got a picture of David Irving, and I put it down on the table, and I covered up one eye with my hand, and I looked at the other eye, and I saw there a psychopath, a sociopath, and I took that hand away, and I put it over the other eye. And I looked again at the other eye of David Irving, and I saw a damaged human being. And in that moment, I knew I could play him. I didn't want to play him for sympathy, I didn't want to play him for empathy, but play him as a human being. I think it's a marvelous performance, really marvelous, but I hope you agree. And everybody else came on board because of the script, because of the story of Deborah Lipstadt. It's an amazing story, and if you think of it, it's a very unpromising story for a movie, and you may indeed decide it was an unpromising story for a movie. In every movie that has a protagonist who triumphs over odds, insuperable odds, whether it's Dustin Hoffman in Straw Dogs or it's Erin Brockovich, Julia Roberts, they start out as being a man in the street or a woman in the street. Ordinary talents and ambitions, rather shy, taciturn, self-effacing, without a voice. And when this great injustice or evil is visited on them, through the movie they grow in stature and they get a voice. And they have this wonderful speech in the final act. Jimmy Woods described it to me as the championship speech, and it brings the house down. Well, this is the opposite of that character arc in this story. This is a woman who starts with all those things. She starts with tremendous personality, tremendous feisty personality, keen, biting intelligence, and a voice. She's very articulate. She knows her subject. She has passion. She has energy. She has drive. She's self-sufficient. And in this movie, she loses all that because her legal team tells her, no, you can't use that. You can't talk to the press, even though you're good at it. You can't stand up in court, even though you'd be good at it, because that will lose us the case. We don't want to make it about the survivors. We don't want to give Irving the chance to browbeat them, humiliate them, reduce them to tears in court. And we don't want him to make the case about them and about you. We want to make the case about him.
And her trust in doing that, it was incredible, because the pressure that the survivors were putting on her must have just been...
Oh, it's awful. I mean, if you imagine sitting there, you feel in your heart what these survivors are going through. One of them is drilling holes in the back of your neck from the gallery, and they're yards away from you as your nemesis, poking fun at you, the fact that you're not standing up and testifying. I think it's a great story to tell that she goes from being a solitary person, very self-sufficient, to becoming part of a team. She goes from being what she sees herself as, really, and what her mother thought she would be, Deborah, the warrior who leads her people into battle, a lone warrior. She's the one who will stand up to David Irving. She can't be that, but she can be part of a fighting unit. If you can continue the military metaphor, she can be part of a platoon where everybody watches everybody else's back, and that's what she becomes in the end. She kind of becomes part of a team. So that's her journey. Instead of becoming the voice, she was the voice, and she finds the voice in the team, and they win the case.
So speaking of participant media, when did Jeff Skull come on? And was he...
Participant media had this enviable reputation of doing really socially worthy films, you know. And the producers of this film had worked with Participant on The Soloist. You remember the one about the cellist in Skid Row in Los Angeles. And they saw the potential in this story, and they really wanted to put money into it. BBC wanted to put money into it. Not a lot of money, I have to tell you. It's not a lot of money on the screen. But they wanted to do it because they thought, at the time that we started to do this story, which was, for me, 5-6 years ago, there wasn't any presidential election, but there was truth in the air, or the lack of truth in the air. People were telling lies for ideological reasons. At that time, it was about climate change, and it was about evolution, and it was about how vaccines cause autism, and about birtherism even then. And this kind of snuck up on us. Sometimes when you develop a project like this over many years, it grows stale. But this, I think, has grown more and more relevant as we've got to today.
Well, certainly it's relevant to the recent election, or almost election.
Well,
did you think about?
I did.
Consciously think about it?
Yeah, I came into a screening the morning after the first presidential debate, and I thought, oh my God, if only we could have Tom Wilkinson moderating this.
That would be outstanding.
But you know, it's a genuine point. You know, you do need to go after the truth. You know, like a dog with a bone, you need to hang on to it. You can't let somebody away with just a quip and then you pass on to another subject or make a joke or whatever. You do have to pursue the truth as they pursued it with Irving in this film.
And what happened to Irving after this? Was there an appeal? What happened to him?
There was an appeal which he lost, and he was awarded costs against him, so it virtually bankrupted him. He was arrested in Austria and jailed for denying the Holocaust, where it is a crime. He was released after a short time, about part of the sentence, and expelled from the country. And he now makes a living doing a couple of things. He authenticates Hitler souvenirs and says this is genuine or not. And he will take you for £2,000, he will take you on a guided tour of a concentration camp. It's called the Truth Tour, and he goes to Majdanek and Treblinka, and that's how he makes a living.
Well, speaking of the camps, I heard that you visited Auschwitz 40 years ago, and so can you tell us maybe what the difference was this trip because of this film? And you were there earlier for a documentary, correct?
I was. I wrote a brief piece about it for the Landmark newsletter. I was there as a young documentary BBC filmmaker back in the early 70s, 1972, 73. when everything was kind of raw. Nobody had put kind of guide rails around everything or explanatory signs up. It was just there as it had been discovered. And I think they took the view at that time, come in, see this, see what was done here in the name of humanity, see it and be afraid. And now, obviously over the years, the elements are getting at the ruins, it's crumbling, and they can't afford to let people come in and just touch it with their hands. But I had that opportunity because of what I was shooting. You may have seen this thing on YouTube. I did a thing called The Ascent of Man, which was shown on public television here. History of science and mankind and morality. And the presenter of that, Jacob Bronowski, was a scientist and a philosopher. And at the end of one of the programs, he made a plea for tolerance by walking into this pond at the back of Crematorium 2, where, for convenience, the Nazis had just thrown some ashes from the crematorium, a whole load of ashes. They spread them in the river, over marshland. He walked into this pond and took a handful of those ashes, and I rehearsed the shot for him, so I held the ashes in my hand. So I had a certain amount of unfinished business, I think of it as, in my life.
So you can't film there, correct?
You can't film there now, so the producers did this very, very lengthy negotiation with Auschwitz authorities. The same kind of negotiations you would put into a peace treaty, almost, saying, can we come up to the perimeter fence with the actors? Because I don't know if you know this, Schindler's List was filmed not at Auschwitz, but in a mirror image of Auschwitz. If you remember from the Auschwitz sequence, there is this building that the railroad tracks come through. It has an arch in it, a long building with a watchtower on the top. They wouldn't let Spielberg, the story I have anyway, film inside Auschwitz, but the other side of that building, he built a mirror image of Auschwitz on wasteland and filmed there. We pushed those boundaries a little further and said, will you let us bring actors up to the perimeter fence? And then we did kind of cinematic sleight of hand. Wow. And made it appear that they did for our movie what the original people actually had done. When they went on
you would have had to build some buildings, correct?
We built a set of the roof of the gas chamber because we couldn't allow people to go onto that. But it looks as if they...
But it's real that Wilkinson really did walk that perimeter before.
Yes. Yeah.
During the shoot, did you have access to Richard Rampton, the Tom Wilkinson character?
It's a great thing when you do a film about real people. I love doing films about real events and real people. The last thing I did before this was an HBO movie called Temple Grandin about a woman with autism who designed slaughterhouses for a living. And Claire Danes, I always offer an actor the chance of doing this if it's on a real person's life. Do you want to meet them? Do you want to hang out with them? Do you want to find out who they are? And she said, yes, I do. Some actors don't. And in this case, everybody hung out with everybody. So Rachel Weisz hung out with Deborah Lipstadt. They became buddies. If you look at the latest issue of the New Yorker magazine, you'll find a very nice piece by Tad Friend about the chemistry between the two, between the woman and the actress. Richard Rampton hung out with Tom Wilkinson. The only person who didn't hang out with anybody was David Irving and Timothy Spall.
But I hear Timothy Spall was starting to feel very isolated because he wouldn't even, no one would, if you notice in the film, no one looks him in the eye. And right. so that kind of transferred during, breaks,
he's
correct?
A very brave actor to take on these complicated people. And I think by the end of the shooting, it was getting to him. Living in that shell was a deeply unpleasant place to be, but he did it. And on the very last day of shooting, we took the shot where the egg hits him from behind. And that was the last straw. He just didn't want to do it after that. It was so humiliating for him as his character to be hit by an egg, and just for him as an actor, he'd given it his all.
And what was the motivation of Rampton to do this pro bono?
Here I have to talk about myself and my own experience. Yeah. When I was working on the script with, it's a rather roundabout way of answering your question. When I was working on the script with David Hare, I remembered my own experience with Bronowski back 40 years ago. And I was there. I'm not Jewish, but I felt an enormous emotion standing there, holding the ashes in my hand. And then I learned that Richard Rampton on this trip this fact-finding trip before the trial, had not gone through something like that, but had gone through that emotion of anger and outrage and sorrow. And I thought, well, that's me. So I persuaded David Hare to develop that relationship between Deborah Lipstadt and Rampton a little bit. So, you could easily say, and this isn't a Jewish film, it's about the Holocaust and the awful infamy of that. But it's also about us as human beings. It's not that the Holocaust only happened to the Jews any more than Hiroshima only happened to the Japanese. It happened to all of us. And the fact there was somebody intimately involved in this story who wasn't Jewish, who was nonetheless a decent person. Tom Wilkinson is a very decent person. Richard Rampton is a decent person.
Outstanding to learn German so that you can read the records. It's unbelievable. It's what's very interesting what's going on in America today that it parallels this. Did you have any inkling of that, or is it independent?
Some things get better and some things just change and often get worse. Yes, we had an inkling that people would always bend the truth. In fact, there's a whole occupation of people. There was a documentary last year called Merchants of Doubt. That's what they call themselves. People whose job it is to bend the truth or pervert it so you're not quite sure where the truth actually lies. To my horror, I find that people are actually denying Sandy Hook now in the way that they denied the Holocaust. That's just appalling. But you have to call it out when you hear untruth like that. You can't let it pass.
Absolutely. What's Deborah Lipstadt doing now?
I think she's on a plane somewhere, about to land and go to another screening of this film and promote it. She really believes in this film, and we believe in her. The
question is the judge accurately portrayed?
Let me say something specific about that and general about the film. There's a caption at the beginning that says, based on a true story. That's not true. It is a true story. Everything that David Hare wrote that is said in court by anybody in court, including the judge, is based on the transcript, absolutely verbatim. We didn't consult in any way David Irving in this movie, but we didn't want him to be able to say, you distorted me, you distorted my words. So everything that David Irving says in the movie came from his speeches, articles, interviews, books, whatever, every word. And the judge too. The judge was, in fact, trying to work out for himself how he was going to phrase his verdict. He was just trying some ideas out, but it scared the hell out of everybody in the courtroom and made them feel they'd lost the case.
How do you want the film to be seen 10 years from now, 15 years from now? How do you see it affecting the world?
I'm not at all sure that films do affect the world. To the extent that I think they might, that's why I keep on making them. Any film that just requires you to sit down and listen to an argument and words like this and not just follow exploding cars is a welcome change. And I think if it does focus your mind on truth and what it is and how you can preserve it and prevent it from being abused, I think that's...
Well, I have to agree with you, and I think that more people will see film than anything else, and that becomes their truth. So thank you. I echo this gentleman. Thank you very much. And thank you very much for coming.
Thank you for coming.
You have been watching the Landmark Theater's Q&A podcast. For further in-depth discussions with filmmakers, be sure to check out the other Q&As available on our channel from past films. And remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel to stay up to date with all our bonus content. Thanks for watching.